Ja Morant is once again in the national consciousness of the National Basketball Association after an ESPN article from Baxter Holmes and Tim McMahon. A lot of rehashing, but a little bit of news, some team sources, some upset Memphis business owners, what all of this means, how the national media is looking at these Memphis Grizzlies. And then we're going to end today's show talking NBA award bets for the Grizzlies. That and much more on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and it would not be a day that ends in Y if I was not pissing off somebody on social media or in the comments of Locked On Grizzlies. I'm Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media. That is Damichael Cole, the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, Tennessee. He's the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication, and we are your hosts for Locked On Grizzlies each and every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, your team each and every day. Damichael, it was a quiet Wednesday.
Yeah, that's a way to put it.
And then the bottom fell out, and I tweeted what I thought were logical thoughts about the Ja Morant article, talking about, how there being team sources involved is kind of out of character for these kinds of pieces, right? The Memphis Grizzlies are usually running a pretty tight ship.
Very tight ship.
Who the team source is. Some people said it might be Danny Green because of his ESPN connections. And that's pure speculation. I want to stress that. Nobody actually knows what's going on there. But that was just one of the weird turns of the day. I was called a racist. I was called someone who hates Memphis, somebody who never has understood Memphis, after writing over 2,000 pieces of content about the city of Memphis and their Grizzlies. I would beg to differ. But it was a wild day on social media. I wrote a piece over at Bluff City Media about, the idea of Memphis maybe someday. I don't think they're anywhere close to this right now. Someday giving up on Ja Morant. That was kind of the tone of the article, which admittedly has its flaws. If you haven't read it over at ESPN by Holmes and McMahon, by all means do so. Other people mentioned this on social media, Damichael. And, again, Damichael, for the record, Damichael is a beat writer for the Memphis Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal, right? Like, he is there almost every day in an official capacity. Damichael is going to handle these questions and thoughts differently than me, a blogger and podcaster who this is their hobby that they're fortunate enough to get paid for, right? So now that that's out of the way, McMahon and Holmes, especially McMahon, have a bit of a reputation. I've kind of, for lack of a better term, poo-pooed on McMahon on these podcasts in the past, being a part-timer in Memphis, only when the Dallas Mavericks aren't in town, like they're on a 12-day, road trip to the Middle East and Europe. And that's why McMahon comes to Grizzlies media days. But Baxter Holmes is the investigative sports journalist who broke the Robert Sarver Phoenix Suns story.
Yeah.
So to just completely dismiss this and say, it's just the same old, that's not true. Like, there was a lot of the same old, but again, the team source stuff from a group that is usually pretty close to the chest in terms of how they play things, that's significant. The Memphis business owner might be the least significant piece of it, but it is still someone who is articulating a frustration that is obviously interacted with Morant.
Yeah.
All of these things, Damichael, again, how relevant is it to you there on the ground in Memphis? A lot of rehashing of things that we already knew, but again, that team source thing keeps standing out to me as someone who's frustrated with Morant and speaking on it, even if it's anonymously.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you read the story on the ESPN article we're alluding to, you saw that a lot of it was pretty much kind of, in a way, a timeline of some of the things that have happened. And if you follow, my coverage and some of the, other local media's coverage, and even, I think the Washington Post has done a really good job.
Absolutely.
Especially they broke a couple stories on this as well. But a lot of it has already been kind of reported on. But what we saw in this story, there was a little more depth to certain things, kind of alluding to, Ja Morant's road behavior and things like that. And that's where the team source and the business owner kind of came into play in this situation. So I'll start with the team source because that's the part that sticks out to you there. With the team source, yeah, it's, to me, I think the word that I used was alarming. With the Grizzlies, as someone who works in media, I am very well aware of how tight a ship the Grizzlies run. It's tight. And I've been around a couple NBA teams. Yeah, I'm only 26 at this point, but still, I've been around a few NBA teams, and the Grizzlies are about as tight as I've seen. Maybe the New York Knicks are the only one that's comparable, in my opinion, for the teams I've been around. But it's a really tight ship here, and it's not a lot of a lot of those things don't really get out. And at the end of the day, I know a lot of people have their opinions of Tim McMahon and Baxter Holmes, but they are really good at their jobs. Tim McMahon has been doing this a long time, and he's a good journalist. And Baxter Holmes is a very good. You mentioned he broke the Robert Sarver story in Phoenix that actually led to Phoenix getting a whole new owner, like
massive change.
Yeah, and he's broken more stories than that. He's really good with the investigative side of things. But my takeaway was a lot of it was information that we kind of already gathered up to this point. A couple extra details sprinkled in. The team source did stand out to me because usually don't hear those leaks in the Grizzlies, but it was relevant information. If those things were going on. But when people say it's relevant information, it's relevant, but to the time that we're in now, as in September, October, we've already kind of gotten to the point where most people around here have accepted Ja Morant's suspension, the punishment. He's spoken about it. The Grizzlies have spoken about it. Zach Kleiman has spoken about it. That part of it kind of feels, old, right? And then there was the business owner side of it as well. And again, I think Tim McMahon and Baxter Holmes were very thorough with their reporting, and there is accuracy to what they're saying. I'm not surprised that there are some business owners. It sounds like there was maybe one or two, or I don't know the exact number.
I believe it was two, but I agree that it was unclear.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that there are business owners who had that opinion. But again, that is something that you probably haven't seen me touch on or really speak on that much because of the fact that I know for a fact there are other business owners who have a completely different opinion of Ja Morant in that light. I've heard the stories about Ja Morant going to lounges in Memphis and tipping hundreds of dollars and buying bottles for other sections and things like that, like being generous with his money, as well as the opposite side of where it sounds like in the story they kind of allude to him and his group going in and making a ruckus in places and things like that. But I've heard the other side of it too. So I think if you tell that side of the story, you gotta try to mention the fact that he does go and spend his money and take care of a lot of these business when he goes out, so there's that part of it as well. Overall, I get why some people were saying, hey, why now? But is this something it seems like they were working on months and months and months ago? It was a very thorough piece. Yes, a lot of it was rehashed information and things like that. I saw some people saying the hit piece, and it was a hit piece. But I mean, if you talk about what really stood out to me in terms of that side of it was the music thing. I don't really understand that part of it, Joe.
To me, that was the worst part of it. To me, that was the worst. That was the worst part. It was like somebody that blames video games for school shootings. That's exactly the vibe I got from them.
And as someone, I'm around these guys a lot. Most of you have seen me write about the musical connections with the team. Desmond Bane listens to the same music that Ja Morant listens to. The rapper that was referenced in the story was Trippie Redd. Jaren Jackson Jr. listens to him a lot. Brandon Clark listens to him a lot. I don't see that leading to suspensions on their side or gun waving. Desmond Bane loves pretty much all the music that Ja Morant loves. So I don't see the correlation there. I do get the relevance of pointing out how these events led to Ja Morant getting here. But overall, those were pretty much my takeaways. I think this was something that they were working on for a while, and they probably had to get this story out. It's still some relevance there. I'm sure most people in Memphis have kind of gotten themselves to turn the page, but that's not everywhere. Ja Morant is still, as my columnist at Commercial Appeal, Mark Giannotto, wrote, Ja Morant is going to be a big deal the entire season, and this thing is going to be continuously brought up pretty much until he plays his way out of it.
Yeah, you don't get to be crowned as the next Kobe or LeBron or next great, American-born NBA player. And then when something like this happens, the media attention go away. Like, that's not how this works. So I do think that's significant. I think this is something that we need to keep talking about, Damichael. This feels like a 2-segmenter today on today's show. And talking because, I have a couple more thoughts to kind of build upon what you just said. Plus, all this takes away from the fact, like, the thing that I wanted to talk about today, media-wise, is the fact that John Hollinger has the Grizzlies as the number 1 team in the Western Conference by his projections. And you have ESPN. I think Kevin Pelton has them as the number 1 team in the Western Conference. And, there's podcasts, national podcasts that have the Grizzlies as the 1 or 2 seed. So it's almost like a disconnect, right? It's weird. There's dissonance there when looking at this Grizzlies team. And we'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Jase Medical. Jase Medical is extremely significant because of the work that they do in terms of providing potentially life-saving antibiotic care. They do a phenomenal job providing those opportunities to you and for you, making sure that you are not impacted by drug shortages. This issue has reached critical levels in the United States, with approximately 309 drugs facing shortages as of the end of July this year. There are natural disasters occurring worldwide. There is no telling when one might strike you or your loved ones. There's all sorts of things that could get in the way between you and proper care. The one thing that we can do is prepare. So don't get caught unprepared. Make sure you're empowered to have Jase Medical at your hand. 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. Extremely significant, of course. So make sure you're checking out Jase Medical. Go to jasemedical.com and enter the code Locked On at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code Locked On at jasemedical.com. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to continue this conversation about Ja Morant and the Grizzlies in the national media. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I'm Joe Mullinax, joined by Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer. And I said it a little bit earlier. I want to stress I'm biased. There's no one that covers the Memphis Grizzlies better than Damichael Cole. So if you don't follow him on X at Damichael C, you're making a mistake. If you want to get mad on social media, you can follow me at Joe Mullinax. And I think I write pretty well every once in a while.
You do, Joe. You do.
But no, I appreciate that. But Damichael Cole, obviously there's others in Memphis that do a good job locally. I'm biased, but Damichael's the man. He's been on top of a lot of this stuff with Ja. Stick with him. We'll obviously stick with him here at Locked On Grizzlies, but make sure you check out your stuff or his stuff at the Commercial Appeal. No disrespect to Mark Giannotto. I like Mark a lot. The main reason I'm still subscribed to the Commercial Appeal is Damichael Cole, and that's a fact. I think that, what I wanted to kind of respond to what you mentioned earlier on in the previous segment. I think that Bomani Jones, who we've had, friend of the show almost. I think you have to be on the show more than once to be friend of the show. Maybe we'll try to get him back on so we can say that. Bomani Jones, he made a great point on social media, not necessarily the T Morant thing. That feels like a separate episode, maybe, talking about the dad aspect of this. Yeah. But, we continue, whether it's fans on social media, whether it is a blogger or a local media member who is trying to support Ja in the best way they think they know. There's a lot. The only person that can tell a grown man what to do is the grown man, right? That's essentially, to paraphrase what Bomani said. And I think that's significant when it comes to Ja, because so often it's others' fault, right? Like, none of this story would have ever come out if he didn't do a lot of the things that we have documented proof of them happening. Yeah. So I'm curious, as in your role, again, locally as a media member, but then if you are a Baxter Holmes, if you are a Tim McMahon, you and I, and people that are watching Locked On Grizzlies are everydayers. We're very much aware of what happened with Ja Morant. That's not necessarily the case in, Pennsylvania. That's not necessarily the case in California. There's a national story angle to this that I think Memphis Grizzlies fans haven't experienced before because we've never had a star like this. Jeff Calkins of the Daily Memphian, I think, said it best. Morant's the biggest star in that city since Elvis Presley.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's a 100% truth. So you have to realize that while we might be well aware of all of the transgressions, and there may not be a ton of new things for you and me and for our dear listener and viewer, there might be something new for people as the NBA season gets kicked back into high gear. There's a lot of young fans across this country that follow Ja Morant, and they're going to be wondering, why is he not playing? Maybe they're not as in tune with what's going on off the court as a casual fan. And I do think that's significant.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of layers we can kind of peel back, with this piece, with this perspective. You touched on it best. Locally, I know how people here feel about Morant. We know how people feel about Morant. Nationally, he is a big phenomenon as well. And that's why people are saying like, there's certain things, other players are making mistakes around the league. And granted, those things need to be covered extensively and whatnot. But
right.
I think we have to understand that certain reporters are assigned to certain areas. Like I think people were calling out Tim McMahon saying he should write about like Miles Bridges and things like that. Well, that's not his designated assignment. And
it's
things
disgusting
like that.
behavior. It's disgusting behavior from Miles Bridges.
Sure.
Everything he's doing is awful, and he should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But let's be real. The NBA is a business, and nobody gives a damn about Miles Bridges when compared to Ja Morant.
Yeah, from that perspective.
That's unfortunate. And I want to stress that the two things that are happening, Ja Morant making poor decisions and being irresponsible, is nowhere near as egregious as what Miles Bridges is
doing. Not at all.
I want to stress that completely. But if you are ESPN and you are trying to drive advertising and you are trying to make money and you're trying to pick one of the two, I'm not excusing it, but I'm not at all surprised that there's not a piece going out about Miles Bridges. It's not going to be read. Yeah. It's not going to be read because they don't know who Miles Bridges is. They know who Ja Morant is, and that's one of the reasons that the NBA is taking this so seriously, Damichael.
Exactly, and the story that was written on Ja took months to put together, so that's another part of it. Like if if they were to write a similar piece about Miles Bridges, it would take probably a lot more time to develop the sourcing.
A lot more legalese.
Yeah, to put that piece together. But all that being said, like yes. Even though a lot of this was rehashed information, I'm sure there were some people that read the story nationally and got a different perspective on that angle. But as I was saying, earlier, like Ja Morant is a big deal. Memphis may not be used to this. Like this is how it's going to be when you have a star player. I mean, think about how we joke about all the LeBron headlines, all the Steph Curry headlines. Like, go look at jersey sales last year. Ja Morant was right below those type of guys. He is a big deal in the leagues, and when things happen regarding Ja Morant, there's going to be long deep dive stories that come out and whatnot, and sometimes it'll look like they're attacking him and things like that, when in reality, he's just a big deal. And I think what some people want to happen is Ja Morant suspended 25 games. Boom, got it. No more stories on Ja Morant. Some people want that. Just let him be. And I get it. As from a fan's perspective, I do understand. You don't want your guy to continuously get piled on. But, there is the perspective of, like you said earlier, you kind of, you make your bed, you got to lay in it, because Jason Tatum is a star player, and you don't see, he's a young star. You don't see these stories coming out about him and other guys like that. But at the same time, I do think the only person who can change this, only person who could fix this, is Ja Morant. And he's probably going to keep taking some blows until the 25-game suspension ends. He returns to the court, and he proves that this is a thing in the past. Again, he has to prove it. That is a thing in the past over the course of time. Some people want to believe that it's a thing of the past right now at this very moment and say that's that. But everyone's not going to do that. And everyone, I think Memphis Grizzlies fans and Josh supporters, period, say, okay, the past is the past. Let it go. There are other people who are going to follow this story because it's Ja Morant. He's a star. There are other people who will follow this story and say, I wonder how he's doing now. I wonder how he's doing now. They're going to want those relevant updates. And this, don't think this story really gave us any relevant updates with anything recent. And that's kind of probably was a lot of people's, problem with it. But at the same time, I'm just saying that, when you talk about the national media's Grizzlies focus, you got to expect that because, quite frankly, me locally, I'm going to cover Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. to a T. Nationally, they're not going to get covered like Ja Morant.
It's not going to happen. I think that it's an important topic to talk about. I think that it's a fascinating, like you said, Damichael, there's layers to it in numerous ways to tackle this. Probably something else we can talk about in the lead up to the season next week. I think we can maybe revisit this. I do want to get your thoughts real quick, partner, on what we mentioned earlier, the fact that Ja Morant is out. Obviously, that's been made paid a lot of attention. And yet there's numerous national media outlets, ESPN included, but The Athletic, picking this Grizzlies team to finish at the top of the Western Conference. That seems like cognitive dissonance to me. I struggle with how Ja Morant's downfall, as Holmes and McMahon described it in their title. And again, the writers don't always give the titles. Actually, they rarely give the titles. But how that can coincide with the Grizzlies, it seems strange to me to just say, oh, yeah, Ja Morant's career might be falling apart, but the Grizzlies are going to be the best team in the West. I struggle with that connection.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? But again, the Grizzlies have developed this depth, and maybe we're about to see that play out, right? They go get Marcus Smart, they go get Derrick Rose. You draft all these young guys who are expected to be in these big roles. Clearly, the people that you're referring to who have the Grizzlies, finishing high, they think that that's what's about to happen.
It's wild. It's wild to me. But, again, something else that we can talk a little bit more in depth about, obviously the ESPN article, taking the focus of our episode on this particular day on Locked On Grizzlies, and understandably so. I regret nothing. And that includes all my interactions on social media. So those of you that told me to eat bags of things, or those of you that wished that I would be fired from certain areas and places, I'm not going anywhere. Right? I'm the Leonardo DiCaprio Wolf of Wall Street gist. The show must go on, baby. I'm still here hanging out with my buddy Damichael Cole, who Damichael likes working with me, by the way, for all those of you that think surely we don't get along. We actually do, right? Damichael, you can speak to that.
Of course, man. I mean, Joe, we got a great thing going here on Locked On.
Yeah.
Everybody's love tuning into Locked On. I think we balance each other out perfectly.
Leave the bad vibes on the side.
This is the place to be. This is the place.
The vibes are still immaculate here on Locked On Grizzlies. They're still immaculate here. All right. When we come back on Locked On Grizzlies, we'll close out this episode talking about NBA award bets, not necessarily specific lines, but just guys that we see as the best possibility for Memphis potentially getting a NBA end of season award. So a little bit of a preview there coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, speaking of bets, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's right, $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options available, including things like spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. Make sure you're visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season right with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Awards Watch next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media, joined by Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Between the two of us, we've got you covered with just about everything you could imagine when it comes to the Memphis Grizzlies. Obviously, heading into our Friday edition of the show, we'll be previewing our final preseason game. Damichael will be flying solo on that episode, taking a look at Memphis, Milwaukee, and any other possible reactions from folks around the NBA or within the Memphis Grizzlies organization about the ESPN piece. I'm sure Damichael will have plenty to talk about on that Friday edition of the show. And then the next time we're together, we'll be previewing the season at large. It'll be game week, so to speak, opening week in the NBA. This is a perfect time for end of season award kind of predictions. We'll give our official predictions next week to Michael. I'll start if it's okay with you.
Of course.
I think that the most likely one, I know Chris Harrington of the Daily Memphian talked about Desmond Bane as most improved player recently on the Jeff Calkins show. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I think
I feel like that's trying to take a layup. That's like a layup. You gotta go out on a limb a little bit more. Dez is going to be in a bigger role. He showed the signs. Like that's like saying Mikal Bridges for most improved, in my opinion. It's okay. That's an easy one. You got to come a little bit harder.
I like the energy coming from you to Michael Cole. I like the way you're finishing this episode. I'm fired up right now. I'm inspired. I'm going to bring some energy here.
Okay.
Hey, national media. Riddle me this. Ja Morant suspended for 25 games, and yet the Grizzlies are projected to be the number 1 or number 2 seed in the Western Conference. If that happens, you know who needs to be the coach of the year in the NBA? Taylor Jenkins, because they would be doing this given everything that's happening. The Boston Celtics with Joe Mazzulla, he was considered a coach of the year candidate. He was in that running when all the stuff was going down. If the Grizzlies stay atop the Western Conference, considering everything that's encircling them right now and enveloping them, it should be Taylor Jenkins as NBA Coach of the Year. Period. End of story. That is my best Memphis NBA award bet. Taylor Jenkins, Coach of the Year. Crown him if they're at the top of the Western Conference.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's a good one. I don't want to take the easy way out myself, because if I wanted to take the easy way out, I would say Jaren and Marcus as Defensive Player of the Year candidates.
Yeah.
But I ain't going to take the easy way out right here.
Shoot your shot, partner.
How about the idea of, and I've referenced this in past episodes, Luke Kennard sneaking into that 6th Man of the Year conversation.
Yes. I love that.
Here's where I am. We know points per minute, he is going to get there. We know that it's going to be, he's going to score. I know people are talking about him struggling from 3-point range in the preseason. Look, I've been at practice, and that man ain't missing. Like, it's only a matter of time before it falls in the game. He ain't missing at practice. So, with all that being said, I'm expecting him to have a bigger role. As we said, they're going to put Dez on the floor with Luke Kennard more. Even when Dez is off the floor, I'm sure they're going to try to emphasize having one of those guys on the floor at all, if not most times. So he's going to come off the bench. He's going to fit that criteria, that 6th man that's going to probably close some games, depending on the opponent and things like that. So he's going to get a lot of scoring opportunities. The Grizzlies are going to put him in situations to play make a little bit, as we've seen, a little bit over the course of the preseason. I think that Luke Kennard can sneak his way in there about 14, 15 points a game, and the Grizzlies are winning a lot of games. Think about it. If the Grizzlies are winning a lot of games this year and Ja Morant is 25 games, the bench is probably going to be a big reason why. And if the Grizzlies have one of the top benches in the NBA, somebody's got to lead it. My bet is Luke Kennard. I think that could be a trendy pick for 6th Man of the Year.
I'm going to give you another one. I'm going to give you a bonus one, partner, just because how inspired I am by your layup comment a moment ago with the Desmond Bane most improved player one. NBA writers and voters of these awards, they're creatures of habit. Is that fair to say? You've been around them a lot more than me. Creatures of habit. So although with this new CBA, the all NBA teams can technically be positionless, is it fair to say that they're still probably going to lean towards like having at least some bigs on this list?
Of course.
It's not going to be guards and forwards.
Of course.
Okay. Let's say Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic continue to be the 2 best centers in the NBA, right?
Yep.
With Jokic being arguably the best player in the league, period.
Yep.
Again, riddle me this. Who could be the 3rd best center or big like that in the NBA?
Are you saying Jaren Jackson for all NBA?
3rd team all NBA, Jaren Jackson Jr. Here's the branch. Here's me going out on it. Branch, me, boom. I'm done.
Take that, Anthony Davis. You heard him.
Take that, Anthony Davis. That's right.
You too, Porzingis.
Anthony Davis. Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps Porzingis is what I'm saying.
Karl Anthony Towns, he doesn't care about your redemption year.
He's going to be on the Knicks by the trade deadline anyway. He's going to be out of Minnesota because Minnesota is going to be underachieving and they're not going to want to pay for all that. All right. So that's another one for you. Jaren Jackson Jr., 3rd team all NBA. And that's going to result in him being eligible for that 5-year, $300 million.
It's going to be a lot of Memphis. It's going to be a lot of M's handed out in the
a lot of moolah in Memphis. And ironically, to bring this episode full circle, that would make Ja Morant the third highest paid player on the Memphis Grizzlies, which, the only person to blame for that, it ain't ESPN, and it ain't Damichael Cole, and it sure as hell ain't Joe Mullinax. The only person to blame for that is Ja Morant. And I think that we're on the same page on that front at the very least. Don't want to put words in your mouth, partner, but it sounds like we're on the same page there.
For sure.
Thank you guys so much for being with us wherever you're taking in Locked On Grizzlies on YouTube, however you get your podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. All of those wonderful options are available to you to make us part of your everyday podcast consumption. Be an everydayer with Damichael and I. We would appreciate it, and I think you'd enjoy it as well. Make sure that we are part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. Damichael, as I mentioned, you'll be flying solo for the last episode of this week. Any other ideas beyond, the Memphis-Milwaukee angle that you might be talking about on this Friday edition?
Look, at this point, I just want to talk ball.
I
just want to talk ball. I'm so tired of all this off the court trauma. Like we're going to talk basketball, and I've been at these practices. I think they'll practice on today as well, and I've gotten a lot of cool little tidbits that we can add. And I got a couple nice stories that I'm working on as well that kind of reference. So we got a lot of good things to kind of uncover tomorrow's episode.
Sounds like a loaded Friday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you are there. I will be back with Damichael on our Monday episode of the show. But until then, make sure you're checking out the Friday edition with Damichael. Stay locked in wherever you get your podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. I'm Joe. He's Damichael. Until next time, this is Locked On Grizzlies.